Good morning, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So, in this video, we'll be taking up the important news articles from the perspective of the UPSC Civil Services examination for 22nd of February 2023. So, let's start with today's analysis. So, we'll be looking into the DNA test and the right of the children to protect the genetic information. And apart from that, there is BBC documentary issue which is going up, and Russia suspends the last nuclear deal with the US. So we'll be looking into all these things. So Supreme Court is going to hear the Uddhav's plea against the Election Commission order, which was regarding the name and the symbol of the political party of Shiv Sena. So former Maharashtra Chief Minister, he accuses the poll body of being biased after it allotted the Shiv Sena name and symbol to the Shinde faction. And he says that the rival faction is taking over bank accounts and the properties of the party also. So the order of the Election Commission allows Mr. Shinde to take over the leadership of the party without duly contesting the intra-party elections in accordance with the party constitution. So here, the internal democracy within the political parties is also one of the important issues. And here you should be clear with what is the proper manner of and what are the basis of allocating the name and the symbol of a political party if there is a dispute between two factions. And India and Singapore, they link the payment services. So India's unified payment interface, that is UPI, and Singapore's Pay Now, they were officially connected, and which allowed for a real-time payment linkage. And we are also having such linkages, and you can use the UPI payments in other countries as well. So the launch was led by a phone call between the prime ministers and the Singapore counterpart. So this is one of the things. So Singapore is the first country with which cross-border person-to-person payment facilities have been launched. And this will help the Indian diaspora in Singapore, especially the migrant workers, students, and bring the benefits of digitalization and financial technology to the common man through the instantaneous and the low-cost transfer of money from Singapore to India and vice versa. Then we are seeing greater flamingos flying over the Varla wetlands about 90 kilometers west of Ahmedabad. And this is a good month to see these birds, which will fly away when the weather gets warmer. So you need to know that which state has the highest number of wetlands, and there are in total how many wetlands in India. And obviously, you should be knowing about their location also. So coming to stray dogs and the fear because of them, because we again see one incident which led to a boy's death in Hyderabad because of the stray dogs. So like what is there any like policy, or is there any process or is something a procedure behind catching these stray dogs? Obviously you need to be knowing this at the municipality level. And BJP is still hopeful. It says that anything can happen in the mayoral elections at Delhi MCD. So we see that the recently the Anjali case and the Shraddha murder case, they show glaring gaps in the policing. So at the DCP's conference, the LG of Delhi, he flags issues with the investigation and corruption, says such loopholes weaken the public's confidence in police, and advises the personnel to be present among people 24/7 as visible policing deters the criminals. So again, we are like such a kind of instances of similar nature are now more being repeated, because once such incidences they get highlighted in the national media, then people I don't know, like they get inspired because of such instances and they start behaving like that. So Army Chief says that Turkey effort shows India's preparedness level when it comes to the Natural disaster management, and this is one thing which is coming from him. So under Operation Dost, India has sent the relief team there. So you should be knowing about the name of the operation. So Himmat Plus app, you should be knowing about what is the purpose behind this app. So committed to the safety of women of Delhi every moment, we have Himmat Plus app now. So in case of an emergency, you need to press the SOS button, which is available in this app, and an alert message will be given to the police and close selective people, thereby ensuring the safety of the woman. So, a center warns the Punjab government of cuts to the health funding over rebranding the health centers. So, the Union Home Ministry says that the state has continued to remodel the centrally funded Ayushman Bharat health and wellness centers as the Aam Aadmi clinics, with pictures of the Punjab Chief Minister plastered all over those clinics. So they have been in a way trying to like modify this, and obviously there are political interests behind such modification. So we are seeing that in the Haryana House, it bars Abhay Chautala for 2 days because of an alleged unparliamentary behavior. So here you need to be like knowing about even the privileges which are there with the MLAs also, because there are privileges available at the central level, that is to the MPs, but you need to find out if there is any such thing at the state level also, and what is the article that deals with this thing. So Rajasthan's agri-tech mission is going to promote farm mechanization. And obviously, this would be helping in increasing the productivity of the agriculture in India, because low productivity is one of the major concerns here. And the agricultural technology mission established under the separate agricultural budget. And Rajasthan would be basically taking more steps to mechanize agriculture in Rajasthan with the provision for the subsidy on the purchase of the equipment. So here, like you can think about which all technologies can be used in the agriculture, and what would be their benefits, how they need to be made available to the farmers, because at the same time they're expensive. So they need to be pocket friendly, and they need to be accepted by the farmers also for their usage. So the Agri-Tech mission envisages subsidy on the purchase of the hand-operated, power-operated, and tractor-operated and automatic equipments. So the government is providing this. The state government of Rajasthan is providing subsidies on these equipments, and in addition to small and the marginal farmers, agriculturists who are belonging to the SCs and to the tribal community, and the women farmers, they have been given the preference in this initiative. So we are seeing man-animal conflict, specifically in the southern states of Karnataka and Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So the Karnataka Forest Department, it has launched an operation to capture a wild elephant, which killed two people, and they've been arranging 5 trained elephants from the Dugre and the Nagarhole camps. So ISRO announces opportunities to analyze astrosat. So it has announced the opportunity to allow the scientists and the researchers to analyze the data from the first dedicated Indian astronomy mission, which is called AstroSat. Then, So the AO is open for scientists and researchers who are involved in research in the area of astronomy and who are equipped to submit proposals as principal investigators for the specific target observations with necessary scientific and technical justification, and those who can analyze the data. So this is there. So as per a study, brain-inspired image sensor, it can detect minuscule objects. So researchers at the Indian Institute of Science in new study, they have shown how a brain-inspired image sensor, it can go beyond the diffraction limit of light to detect a minuscule object such as cellular components or nanoparticles which are invisible to the current microscopes. So this novel technique, which combines the optical microscopy with a neuromorphic camera and machine learning algorithms, it presents a major step forward in pinpointing the objects which are smaller than 50 nanometers in size. So Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, they have organized first synchronized vulture survey, and here you need to be knowing about which vulture species are there in different wildlife sanctuaries, and if there is any dedicated vulture wildlife sanctuary over there in these states. So we are seeing that we have Mudubalai Tiger Reserve in Tamil Nadu. So it decided to organize the first synchronized vulture survey in Western Ghats to avoid duplications. So the survey would simultaneously be organized in the three forest divisions, including in the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, which is there in Kerala, and the South and North Forest divisions. And apart from that, so Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, it is contiguous to the tiger reserves of the Nagarhole and the Bandipur of Karnataka, and there is Mudumalai Tiger Reserve of Tamil Nadu. So it is the lone region where the vultures thrive in Kerala. So their habitat is also being talked about, and different wildlife sanctuaries and their states. So the sanctuary, it harbors nearly 120 to 150 white-rumped vultures and less than 25 red-headed vultures. So these are two species of vultures which are found. So the occasional sightings of the long-billed vultures have also been reported in the sanctuary. So this is third type. And vultures, they faced a catastrophic population decline during the 2000s when the species, they were exposed to the anti-inflammatory drug, which is known as diclofenac, which is used as a painkiller for the cattle. So whenever these vultures, they feed on such cattle carcasses which were like given these painkillers, which is diclofenac, so it led to their death. And South Asia has about 4 crore white-rumped vultures until the end of the 90s, but the population, it has now come down to less than 10,000. So from 4 crores, they have declined to such a level that presently their number is below 10,000 level. So we need a budget for its young, that is for the younger population, for the demographic dividend that India is enjoying. And obviously we need to utilize that, otherwise it would turn into a nightmare. So the world is indeed looking up to Indian economy as a bright star, as the finance minister noted in the budget speech. So in 2020, India accounted for 20.6% of the worldwide population of 15 to 29 years old. So when you talk about the youth population, so it is between the age group of 15 to 29 years. And at the global level in 2020, we accounted for 20.6% of the worldwide youth population. So which means that in the years ahead, 1 out of every 5 workers that would be deployed globally could be an Indian. So the key proposals in this year's union budget, they are following. On the one hand, there will be a considerable increase in the capital expenditure for building of the physical infrastructure, mainly in the transport, energy, and defense sectors. And apart from that, while the growth of the tax revenues, it is going to be modest, the government is nevertheless committed to reducing the fiscal deficit also. So the shortfall in the government's receipts relative to its expenditure is what do we, you can like simply define the fiscal deficit. So we have a target of reducing it till 5.9% of the GDP, and that could have been achieved only by reducing the spending on some other sectors. So if you reduce the expenditure, that is one of the ways through which you can reduce the fiscal deficit. And obviously, in this budget, we have seen that subsidies and social sector expenditures, they have been curtailed or they have been reduced. So compared to the previous year in 2023-24, the union government's expenditure on the food subsidy will fall by rupees 0.9 trillion, and on fertilizer subsidies by 0.5 trillion rupees, and on MG Narega scheme it would fall by 0.3 trillion rupees. So the marginal increases in the allocation on health and education, agriculture, and the Anganwadi schemes, they are unlikely to make an impact after taking into account the effect of inflation. So this is, we can say, in a broader sense, we can talk about the major trend that we have witnessed in this year's union budget. Now, coming to the main theme of this article that it is talking about, there needs to be a budget which should focus upon the younger population, on the youth. So here it is firstly talking about the public-private complementarities. So a jump in the capital spending by the government as proposed in the budget, it is definitely much needed step to reinvigorate the Indian economy, and investment for buying new machines and building roads and factories as a proportion of the income of the GDP indicates that the rate at which a country's productive capabilities they are growing. So in India, this proportion rose steadily during mid 2000s, and it peaked at 42% in 2007, which was even better than China's record at that point in time. So high rates of investment, it translated into extremely fast rates of economic progress in the country, which lasted until early 2010s. So we know that there's a huge multiplier effect when we talk about the capital expenditure or the investment spending. So apart from that, after that, we saw that the public expenditure, it nosedived, the private investors, they lost the confidence as well. So investment as a proportion of GDP, it came down steadily, and it fell to the level of 33.8% in 2013-14, and then further down to 27.3% in 2020-21. So when we talk about the entire trend of proportion of investment as a proportion of GDP, so that has been sliding down from 2010. So during, like, up till 2010 it was at 42% level. After that it fell to 33%, and then further down to 27% by 2020-21. So in 10 years it has fallen down till to 27%. So in contrast to the capital expenditure, the subsidies and the social sector spending, they are considered wasteful. And as we say that we need to reduce or we need to rationalize the revenue expenditure. So it is on that front that this year's budget saw the rationalization of subsidies. When we talk about the fertilizer subsidy also, so the social sector spending has also been reduced under this backdrop. And it is believed that a cut on the other outlays will not hurt the economic growth. So, quite the contrary, a reduction in the social expenditures not only worsens the existing social inequalities, but also it can also dampen the prospects for the long-term growth as well. So, therefore, the measures such as MG Narega and free provision of the food have been a clutch at straw for millions of poor Indians, hit as they have been by the COVID-19 pandemic, and they've been jobless. So we need to invest in people and invest in future. So public expenditures on the social sectors constitute an investment for the future. So more so for a country with a predominantly young population. So this article is in a way, it is trying to say that the social sector spending should not be curtailed, rather it should be increased in such a way, because obviously if we want to increase, or if when we talk about investing in future, so the social sector spending is a very important aspect in that. So the income a destitute mother receives for work through MG Narega, that may ensure that her children do not have to go to school with empty stomachs, and underinvestment in education, in health, will undercut India's chances in global economy that is increasingly dominated by the knowledge. So when we talk about the health sector, so we have a target of increasing the government expenditure or spending or allocation out of the total outlay up till 2.5% of the GDP, so that the health expenditure, it needs to be increased up to 2.5% of the GDP, but still we are very short of that. And apart from that, even in the education sector, we are like not focusing too much when it comes to the capital expenditure in the education sector, because the allocations remains like merely at a lower level. And then there are unwarranted fears about the fiscal deficit also. So, inflated fears about the fiscal deficit and government debt will only be counterproductive in a country possessing vast reserves of untapped human and other resources, as India does. So, when we talk about the human resource, or even if to be specific about the demographic dividend, so we need to ensure that the human capital is skilled enough, because when we talk about human resource, so it is only when the human capital it is aptly skilled enough for the specified job, and only then we can leverage the opportunity that we have of demographic dividend in India. So only a small proportion of India's public debt is owed to the external agencies. So we do not have like in a way so a lot of pressure in terms of the external debt, and so that does not pose a kind of a threat. And apart from that, India's government debt is held largely by the domestic financial institutions, including the public sector banks, insurance companies, and provident funds. So, in other words, this is a debt the government owes to the people of the country whose savings the financial institutions have mobilized. So, this is one thing which you should be knowing. And if the government is borrowing to build the resources that help generate new jobs and incomes, so it is in fact setting off a virtuous cycle. So, if the government borrowings are utilized in such projects and schemes which help in generating more jobs, so that would lead to starting off of a virtuous cycle. So, for a generation of young Indians, this is without a doubt that a make or break moment right now. And in the absence of a significant climb in the public spending to enhance the human capabilities, there will be no hope for them. So, this will soon grow older, and they'll soon, like, obviously, uh, we have this opportunity for a limited time period, and the proportion of the population in India aged 30 years and above will rise to 58.6% in 2040, and it will be up from 37.5% only in 2000s. So, on the other hand, with the boost in the government expenditure to provide the food security, health, and education, millions of Indian youngsters they could indeed aspire to grow into bright stars that illuminate the whole world. So, talking about the bias between the urban development and the rural development. So there is definitely a divide between the rural and the urban. So that has grown due to an inherent urban bias among the policymakers and institutions, including the government. So this happens because groups in urban areas they are able to effectively influence these institutions in their favor. Secondly, the spillover from the markets in the urban areas is also limited to the rural areas that are closer to the urban settlements. So this is known as the spillover effect, where the development of the rural areas is dependent on larger urban cores. So if there will be like larger amount of development and growth in the urban areas, so that would spill over to the rural areas, and consequently rural areas which are far away from the urban core they not only suffer from a lack of development but also keep falling behind the rural areas which are closer to the urban core. So the rural areas which are closer to the urban core regions they develop at a faster rate relatively compared to the rural areas which are far away from the urban core areas. So we are having Jal Jeevan Mission, which was launched in August 2019, is one such project which aims to provide access to safe and adequate drinking water to all the rural households by 2024. So there is one case study about the Tamil Nadu. So the provision of safe drinking water is an important non-food factor influencing the health and also the nutrition levels. And besides enabling tap water access at the household level, it helps reduce the drudgery women and the girl children they have to face and ensures their safety as well. So ensuring the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, it is the sixth SDG that we have of the United Nations, and that is to be achieved by 2030. So, as it has been 3 years since its implementation at the All India level, tracking its progress in Tamil Nadu is important. So, we are tracking basically the progress of Jal Jeevan mission in the state of Tamil Nadu. And so, that is one thing. So, we'll be not going into detail. So, this rest of the article is talking more about this scheme only in Tamil Nadu. So we just talked about what is the bias between we talked about the urban bias and 2 to 3 factors how rural areas are impacted because of this urban bias. So talking about a new chapter in defense and the technology. So earlier this month, India and US they inaugurated their initiative on the critical and emerging technologies. So the promise of this initiative is, if fulfilled, it could have a transformative impact on India-US relations. So since 1960s, India has made many attempts to jump on the US technology bandwagon, but all of them have failed, and primarily because of the mismatch between the two countries and the purposes for which they collaborated. So this was one of the reasons behind the failure. So this ISET is perhaps better positioned, and unlike the earlier iterations, it comes at a time when India too has developed technological and managerial capabilities and is emerging as a major economic power. So under this initiative, that is the critical and the emerging technologies, the two sides they have identified 6 focus areas of co-development and co-production that includes strengthening our innovation ecosystems, defense innovation and technology cooperation, resilient semiconductor supply chains, and space sector and STEM talent and the next generation telecom. So these are the 6 focus areas under this initiative. And since 1950s, US has played a significant role in India's development efforts and quest for technological capability. And a major driver of the process was the Cold War, which persuaded the US to provide sweeping assistance in a range of areas to India. And so at that point of time, Soviet Union emerged as a major player in areas like steel, heavy electricals, petroleum, and mining. So the US, it focused more on modernizing engineering and management, education, science and technology, and agricultural sector. And after the Soviet Union collapsed, the US pushed for the unconditional extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it began to arm towards the countries to sign a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. So at this stage, India realized that there was no option but to come out as a declared nuclear weapons power. And there was another round of sanctions after the 1998 nuclear test, but by this time the US had it had begun to get a measure of the challenge it was facing from China at the same time. So it now decided to play the India card, but to do this, there was a need to spit out the nuclear proliferation pill that was stuck in our joint throats. And so this was basically done by signing a nuclear deal between India and US in 2008. So which is the basis of our current engagement with the US. So India has steadily advanced in status as a friend of the US, and it has purchased the US weapons and systems worth billions of dollars, and it is now deemed to be a major defense partner, though not a major non-NATO ally, but a much more useful designation that Pakistan still retains. So the course has not been problem-free. Witness the pressures that India faced under the Cards also, and on account of its oil trade with Russia. So obviously there have been certain challenges in the relationship between the two countries, but despite that, our relation has been improving with time. So there are ambitious goals. So ISET, it has set up a range of ambitious goals, which means a great deal for India. And some of them are aspirational, others are political also, and US will help India to develop advanced jet engines. And as of now, all that is on the table is the possible license manufacture of these engines for the LCAs, and this is not new. But cutting edge jet engines are the crown jewels of the US, which the country will not part with. And a similar approach will be taken in other areas where the US jealousy guards its technological prowess, knowing that it is a major component of its global power status. So, after presenting the union budget, our finance minister said in an interview that this is a golden opportunity for India. We should really not miss the bus this time. And the remark is truer of the technology and industrialization, but that the ICT could be. So India, it shifts from checks to credit transfers, the sharpest amongst the other players. So cashless payments, they got a fillip post the pandemic outbreak. And obviously we saw that how the usage and the dependence of people on digital transactions grew during the COVID-19 pandemic and digital economy. So the charts in the table, they are based on the data which has been sourced from the Bank for International Settlements. And apart from that, so let's understand this data which is given here in front of us. So chart one is about the total value of the cashless payments in India, which is shown by this red line. And this is in trillion dollars. And then we have the value of the cashless payments as a share of India's GDP, which is shown by these blue bars. So you can see that both in both these cases, the trend has been on the rise. So in a way, you can see that it has been on a rising trend. Apart from that, the chart 2 is showing the value of the payments done using checks and the credit transfers and other systems as a share of the total value of the cashless payments in India. So earlier we used to rely more upon checks when we talk about the non-cash or basically the cashless payments, but with time now we are shifting and relying more upon the credit transfers. So here this graph, the red one, is showing how the dependence upon checks has been declining so sharply since 2012, and then depending more upon the credit transfers. So this is shown by the blue line. And apart from that, we are having a certain minimal role of the credit cards, the debit cards, and e-money also. Then chart 3 is showing the shape of the checks in the cashless payments across 14 countries, including India over time. So most of the countries are depending less upon checks now as time goes ahead. So this the blue line is for India. So it has been like a very sharp decline when we talk about our dependence upon cash for making payments. Then chart 6 is showing the POS terminals, the point of sale terminals per inhabitant in BRICS countries over time. So it is sharply increased in case of Brazil, and India is at the lowest level. Then after that we have South Africa, then we have Russia, China, and highest we have the point of sale terminals per inhabitant. It is highest in Brazil. Chart 5 is talking about the share of the credit, debit, and e-money payments as a percentage of the cashless payments. So here you need to understand in a chronological manner which one has the highest share. So highest one is in case of the credit cards, followed by debit cards. Then we have the e-money, and lastly we have the delayed debit. So temperature is going to rise above the normal in many parts of India as per IMD, and we are seeing the impact of climate change in diverse ways, be it to talk about the glacial outlet burst phenomena and the risk because of that. Apart from that, the rising sea level and the threat to the coastal areas and the coastal cities and even the coastal countries. And then we are seeing the temperatures rising above the normal temperatures. Again, government is daring to selling wheat from its buffer stock so as to check the prices of wheat, because we are right now we are facing and going through a high cereal inflation. So there's a dire need to protect the domestic met coke against the cheap imports that we have. So the 30% is the anti-dumping duty. The Indian Metrological Coke Manufacturers Association has sought on the met coke to protect the local industry from the cheap imports. So this is one of the ways through which you can, protect the domestic manufacturers by imposing a high amount of anti-dumping duty or the customs duty. So talking about the wash-through accounts and how they facilitate the trade, although we have taken this thing earlier also in a detailed manner, but again, this has appeared after a long time, so we'll be discussing this thing. So this is under the backdrop of India shifting towards and depending more upon rupee as the payment mechanism when it comes to trade, specifically with Russia. So that's why this thing is in news. So, what are the special rupee wash accounts? What are the three important components of the framework? And what is the economic service said about this arrangement? And can this arrangement speed up the rupee status as an international currency or not? And we'll be also looking into what are the conditions for a currency to be declared as an international currency. And is this system going to be reliable or not for India and other countries who will be dealing with us? So we are seeing that last week the government officials they informed that 20 Russian banks, including the names have been given here. So they have opened the special rupee wash accounts with the partner banks in India. So these Vostro accounts, they are opened by, suppose, the banks in Russia, they have to get these accounts opened up in partnership with the banks in India. So all the major domestic banks, they have listed their nodal officers to sort out the issues they faced by the exporters under this arrangement. So firstly, we'll understand what are these special rupee Vostro accounts arrangement. So a Vostro account is an account that domestic banks hold for the foreign banks in the former's domestic currency. So in this case, uh, as we're talking about, depending more upon the rupee transactions, so here the currency is Indian rupee. So the domestic banks of India, they use it to provide international banking services to their clients who have the global banking needs. So in case of exporters, they would be using these special watch-through accounts the to make in case of obviously importers will have to make the payments. In case of exporters, they would be receiving the payments in Indian rupees. So it is an integral offshoot of the correspondent banking that entails the bank, and that would be facilitating the wire transfer and conduct the business transactions, the accept deposits and gather the documents. So that's how they would be working, and it helps the domestic banks gain wider access to the foreign financial markets and serve the international clients without having to be physically present in abroad. So this is one of the advantages even to the domestic banks. And these wash accounts is an additional arrangement to the existing system that uses freely convertible currencies and works as a complementary system. So for perspective, freely convertible currencies refer to the currencies which are permitted by rules and regulations of the concerned country to be converted to major reserve currencies like we have US dollar or pound sterling, and for which a fairly active market exists for dealing against the major currencies. So the existing system does require maintaining balances and position in such currencies. So how is it going to function? The framework entails three important components, which is namely invoicing, exchange rate, and then finally the settlement thing. So the invoicing entails that all the exports and the imports, they must be denominated and invoiced in Indian rupee. So this is regarding the invoicing. Then talking about the exchange rate between the currencies of the trading partner countries would be market determined. And to conclude, the final settlement also takes place in the Indian national rupee. So the authorized domestic dealer banks, they are required to open these special rupee washro accounts for the correspondent banks of the partner trading country. So here in case of India, the partner trading country is Russia. So the Russian banks would have to get their washro accounts opened up in partnership with the domestic banks of India. So that's how they are going to function. So talking about what is the eligibility criteria of these banks. So the banks from the partner countries, they are required to approach an authorized domestic dealer bank for opening these washro accounts, and the domestic bank would then seek approval from the apex banking regulator, that is RBI. So RBI's consent would obviously be needed in this case, and it would be the responsibility of the domestic banks to ensure that the correspondent bank is not from a country mentioned in the updated Financial Action Task Force public statement on high risk and non-cooperative jurisdictions. So obviously that bank, the foreign bank, need not be in this list of FATF, and domestic banks must also put forth for perusal the financial parameters pertaining to the corresponding bank. So authorized banks, they can open multiple or washro accounts for different banks from the same country. So a single domestic bank in India can also open several washro accounts with different foreign banks. And further balances in the account can be repatriated in freely convertible currency or the currency of the beneficiary partner country, depending on the underlying transaction. So what is its purpose? So Economic Survey of 2022-23, it had argued that the framework could largely reduce the net demand for the foreign exchange, that is the US dollar in particular, for the settlement of the current account related trade flows. So obviously this would be reducing our dependence upon the forex currency, specifically the US dollar, and obviously would be away from the volatilities related to it and the exchange rate. And that's how like in case of depreciation, obviously our imports become much more expensive. So when we would be like relying upon the Indian rupee, so we would not be affected because of these fluctuations in the exchange rate. And it added that the framework would also reduce the need for holding the foreign exchange reserves and dependence on the foreign currencies, making the country less vulnerable to external shocks. And Indian exporters, they could get advance payments in Indian rupees from the overseas clients, and in the long term, they promote the Indian rupee as an international currency. Also, once the rupee settlement mechanism, it gains traction across the world with several other countries. And as per the Bureau of International Settlements, the Triennial Central Bank Survey 2022, the US dollar was the most dominant vehicle currency, accounting for 88% of the all trades. So you can have a clear understanding of the dominance of the US dollar in case of global trade, and the Indian rupee accounted for just 1.6%. So the share of Indian rupee definitely needs to increase in order to be declared as the international currency. So will India witness an El Nino forecast this year or not? Because from the last 3 years we've been having La Nina, and how does an El Nino and La Nina, they affect the global climate patterns, particularly the cyclogenesis and the monsoons? So India is experiencing a colder than normal winter thanks to the north-south winter flow setup by the climate phenomena known as the La Nina. And La Nina itself is going on for a record-breaking third consecutive year, and now forecast for 2023, the fall and winter are predicting that there is a 50% possibility for its companion phenomenon, that is El Nino, to occur this year. So there is right now 50% possibility of having El Nino this year. So what is the difference between El Nino and La Nina? So this is a geographical concept. So El Nino refers to a band of warm water spreading from west to east in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So here we're talking about El Nino when we have warm water on the western coast of South America, and the years in which the years in which an El Nino occurs, they are called El Nino years, and the global weather patterns in that year, they tend to be anomalous in certain ways. So similarly, a La Nina occurs when we have the opposite conditions of an El Nino. So here it is. Here, La Nina occurs when the band of water spreads east-west and it is cooler in nature. So both the phenomena, they can have drastic effects on the economies that depend upon rainfall. So specifically in case of India, when we have El Nino, so we have less monsoons, and obviously that affects our agricultural output. And the first thing to note is that El Nino forecast before spring tend to be notoriously unreliable because the climate change is quite noisy in spring. So here is like all these things. So in case of a La Nina year, the tropical Pacific Ocean soaks up heat and accumulates warm water. So during the El Nino, this warm water spills from the western part of the Pacific Ocean to the eastern part, as I talked about right now. So the Earth has three straight La Nina years, and which means that the Pacific's warm water volume is fully loaded and it is likely to birth an El Nino very soon. So an El Nino year creates a miniature global warming crisis since the warm water spreading across the tropical Pacific releases a large amount of heat into the atmosphere also. So in terms of global warming also, this the situation become worse. And apart from that, obviously El Nino impacts the weather pattern, the rainfall patterns, and specifically monsoon in the context of India, that impacts agriculture, and obviously it creates situation of inflation. So what will happen to the cyclone formation and the monsoon? So a transition from a La Nina winter to an El Nino summer historically tends to produce a large monsoon deficit on the order of around 15%. And this means pre-monsoon and monsoon circulations, they tend to be weaker in an El Nino year. So the vertical shear, it tends to be weaker as well. And this in turn can favor the enhanced cyclone formation also. So, but of course, the global climate system is not so simple, and intra-seasonal and the sub-seasonal timescale variability in sea surface temperature and the winds is also very important for the cyclogenesis over the northern Indian Ocean, and that is there. So as for the monsoons, if an El Nino state does emerge by summer, we will likely have a deficit in 2023 in terms of the monsoon. So some research has also indicated that the Indian Ocean dipole, which is a seesawing of the sea surface temperature over the tropical Indian Ocean, that could compensate for the negative effects of an El Nino also. So here you should be like, you can find out more about in order to have more clarity regarding the Indian Ocean dipole. So we don't yet know whether there's a robust relation between the dipole and the summer monsoon, nor whether the dipole will evolve the right way this year. So no surety about even the Indian Ocean dipole. So additionally, there are the monsoon's vagaries themselves. So for example, pre-monsoon cyclones are susceptible to warming in the Arctic region, and it could in turn affect the onset of the summer monsoon. So this article is very important, and you can also have a look at other videos in order to understand the entire process regarding El Nino and Indian Ocean dipole. So Home Ministry it asks states to relieve IPS officers for central deputation. So the officers who fail to join within a month will be debarred from the central deputation for 5 years. And so the state governments, they were either withdrawing the names of the selected officers or they were not relieving them for taking up an assignment with the central government. That resulted in a considerable delay in the placement of the officers at the center, and it adversely impacted the entire process of selection, deputation, and cadre management. So there have been this issue between states, specifically when we talk about West Bengal and the central government. So as per the norms, at least 40% of the senior duty posts in each state cadre are earmarked as central deputation reserve post, and the concurrence of the officers is also required for the central deputation. So this is also one thing. And so this is the issue, and Australia is going to host its first Malabar naval drill this August. So you should be knowing which all countries are involved in this Malabar naval exercise. So it is all the Quad members, that includes India, Japan, US, and Australia. So Australia will be hosting this year's Malabar multilateral naval exercise, consisting of India, Australia, Japan, and US for the first time this year. So this is going to happen for the very first time, and the high tempo of bilateral engagement between the two countries will continue with Australian Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister They are scheduled to visit India early March, during which the officials said that some major defense initiatives could also be announced between India and Australia. And the Quad foreign ministers, they are scheduled to hold a meeting a day after the G20 meeting. So Australia is scheduled to host the Quad summit later this year. So even the Quad summit would be hosted by Australia. So ahead of the UNGA resolution on the Russian war, France lobbies New Delhi to vote, and France is in talks to convince India to shift its position on the Russian war in Ukraine a year into the conflict, urging the Modi led government to vote for the United Nations General Assembly resolution, which is due to be tabled this week, that will call for a cessation of the hostilities, according to the diplomatic sources. And thus far, New Delhi it has refused to vote for any resolution that is critical of the war, either on the UNGA or the UNSC when India was a member last year. So our position is very clear when we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, because we have not like openly condemned Russia, and we have been also importing the discounted crude oil from Russia. So we have been in a way balancing our position between between Russia and the West. So Supreme Court says that children have the right to protect their genetic data. So a child should not be lost in its search for paternity, says the top court, directing the family courts adjudicating between varying parents to order the DNA test only as a last resort. So genetic information is personal and it is intimate, and it sheds light on a person's very essence. A child's genetic information is part of his fundamental right to privacy. So this can come up in prelims, that it forms a part of which fundamental right. And so that is coming up from the Supreme Court of India. And talking about the psychological trauma, so the judge says that it also drew its attention to the rights of privacy, autonomy, and identity recognized under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which India is also a signatory. And the convention acknowledges the control that individuals, including the children, have over their own personal boundaries and the means by which they define who they are in relation to other people. And children are not to be deprived of this entitlement to influence and understand their sense of self simply by virtue of being children. So family courts, they should direct for a DNA test only in expedient situations and in the interest of justice as the last resort. And the judgment, it came in a petition filed by a man who questioned his second child's paternity. So Biden swears by NATO support for Ukraine, says Russia will never win this war. And as we approach the first anniversary of this war, which started on 24th of Feb 2022, and we are seeing that this war is, as of now, it is escalating further. And NATO is supporting Ukraine in terms of financial aid, in terms of the weapons that it is providing them, and obviously Russia is fighting back. And so Ukraine will never be victory for Russia. It says never. And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. And there should be no doubt that our support for Ukraine will not waver, NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. So Russia suspends the last remaining major nuclear treaty with the US. So Vladimir Putin says Russia should stand ready to resume the nuclear weapons test if the US does so. So hours after the announcement, the foreign ministry says that Moscow will continue to respect the cap on nuclear weapons in the agreement. So the treaty is the New START treaty, which is there between Russia and the US. So this was suspended, and it was the last remaining nuclear arms control pact with the US, and sharply upping the ante amid the tensions with Washington over the fighting in Ukraine. So it was signed in 2010, the New START Treaty, and Mr. Putin accused the US and its NATO allies of openly declaring the goal of Russia's defeat in Ukraine. So they want to inflict a strategic defeat on us and try to get to our nuclear facilities at the same time. So still, earthquakes are being hit in Turkey and Syria region, and situation is really concerning and fearful over there. So RBI, it allows the UPI transactions for inbound G20 travelers. So the facility would be enabling all the inbound travelers visiting India to make local payments using the UPI while they are in India has been made available from Tuesday by RBI. So to start with, the facility has been made available to the travelers from the G20 countries at the international airports of Bengaluru, Mumbai, and New Delhi. So you need to find out about what is the technology behind this thing. So angel tax provisions will not impact the startups, and the startups registered with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade do not come under the purview. And let me put one thing very clearly, that it does not affect the startups in the least. And he was basically said this addressing the audience at an event. So this is coming from the secretary in the department. And data centers to grow sixfold in 6 years in India. So data localization and data explosion in India would lead to sixfold increase in data centers capacity in the next 6 years. And right now, when we talk about the total capacity, so it stands between 4,900 to 5,000 megawatt, involving investment of rupees 1.5 lakh crores that is likely to be added. So this is the capacity which is likely to be added with an investment of around rupees 1.5 lakh crores in the next 6 years, and business houses and the foreign investors, as well as the captive consumers such as the Amazon, Microsoft, they have started investing massively in India's data centers. So this can be one of the opportunities as when we talk about the long-term investment by the retail investors. So the companies which are involved in such activities and such areas, you can make an investment in them after like obviously proper research. So steel imports from Russia rise to 8-year high this fiscal. So we have been depending more in terms of steel and crude oil imports on Russia. So India's imports of the Russian steel rose to an 8-year high during the first 10 months of the financial year. And the rising imports are the result of a shift in the Russian steel trade flows to Asia after the Western sanctions were imposed on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine last year. So the changes are displacing some of the traditional suppliers also. Coming to the Indian Express. So you need to be knowing about Khajuraho and where there would be next G20 meeting regarding the World Heritage Sites. So Khajuraho is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we know that the different meetings and conferences are happening at one of the major and one of the significant places in India. So one of them is Khajuraho, and the venue is going to the Maharaja Chhatrasal Convention Center. So Khajuraho is the land of beautiful temples. Khajuraho draws travelers from across the globe, and it has the largest group of medieval Hindu and Jain temples, and it is famous for their Nagara style architectural symbolism. and it is an ancient city known for its magnificent temples and intricate sculptures, striking a perfect balance between architecture and sculpture. So it is a globally renowned cultural destination of India. And you can also have a look at how the temples they look like. So this is the main Shikara, and which is obviously one of the most toppest, one of the most highest, and it is being built over the major Garbhagriha. So they are Nagara style architectural symbolism, which are found in northern India. So the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, it develops a wheat that can beat the heat. So scientists they breed new varieties of early sowing to escape the March mercury spike. So these newly developed varieties they can be like cultivated early so that they'll have not to deal and face with the rising temperatures in the month of March. So, in a first, the Supreme Court it starts the artificial intelligence aided live script of arguments. And for the first time in its history, the Supreme Court on Tuesday started a system for testing live transcription of the oral arguments using artificial intelligence tools and the natural language processing technology. So, as the courts are shifting more upon the e courts, that is there to increase the efficiency of the justice delivery. So you can see a screen here, and we are just trying to explore the possibility of live transcription of arguments in court. And we had to do it in a live environment. So it is an experiment as of now. Directly coming to the editorial page. So censorship is advertising paid by the government. So here it is talking about the privileges. So by engaging in what looks like a partisan political exercise, the Vice President Jagdeep Dharkan sir, he undermines the parliament and his office. So there's a simple, if profound spirit that animates Article 105, which talks about the privileges which are available with the MPs. And we have Article 122 of the Constitution, which de-eliminates the parliamentary privilege. So there shall be a freedom of speech in the parliament. And in essence, the MPs, they are protected from legal action from for anything that they utter in the House, so that neither the executive nor the judiciary it can undermine the deliberative function of the legislature. So this is what these two articles are concerned about, and the recent actions by the vice president as chairman of the Rajya Sabha, the Jagdeep Dharkar sir. So he says that there was a dispute between him and the opposition MPs that seemed to indicate a desire to sanitize at best and censor at worst, and debate and discussions when it seems to go against the government of the day. So we are having a missing deputy speaker of the Lok Sabha, and constitution mandates that the election of deputy speaker of the Lok Sabha soon after the speaker is elected. Yet over 3 years after the present house first met, the position remains vacant. So it has been 3 years that we do not have any deputy speaker of Lok Sabha. So we have Article 83, Clause 2 of the Constitution. The terms of the Lok Sabha begins from the day of its first meeting and ends on the day it completes 5 years from the date unless it is dissolved earlier. So the Constitution, then we have Article 93 of the Constitution. As soon as the House meets after the election, these two presiding officers are elected one after the other. But it is like not giving us a definite time period that after, like within this time period, a deputy speaker should be elected. But it is anyways, it is talking about as soon as possible, a deputy speaker must be elected. So talking about the whales they found stranding on the beaches, factors that could be driving this thing. So we are seeing whales on the Tuticorin beach in Tamil Nadu. So earlier in Feb 14 pilot whales were stranded near the shore of Kalpitya, which is a town located in Sri Lanka's west coast. With the help of a Navy team and the local fishermen, 11 of them were rescued, but 3 were dead. And so why does this happen? So whale stranding is a phenomenon in which whale they get struck on land, usually on a beach, and other aquatic animals like dolphins and porpoises they are also known to beach. So although mass strandings they have been occurring since the times of Aristotle back then, and they were considered a gift from the gods as the stranded animals were a rich source of food and oil. And experts they don't know exactly why they take place, though possible causes includes the illness, topography of the region, human activities, and increasing noise pollution in the oceans. So, what is the likely impact of the human activity? So, experts believe that the mass strandings they are becoming more common as the health of the oceans they deteriorates due to the human interference, such as increase in noise pollution. And several studies they have shown that the noise from the larger commercial ships, the military sonars, or the offshore drilling severely impacts the marine animals' ability to use sound to navigate, find food, and protect themselves. So, this can drive them ashore by deafening and disorienting or frightening them. And another factor could be the rising temperatures of the oceans that causes changes in the prey and predator distribution. So whales and dolphins they often travel where there is food, and changes in the prey movement due to environmental changes like sea temperature and currents may play a role in where whale and dolphin food is located. So right now, just like we saw about the Supreme Court is it has been experimenting with the artificial intelligence transcribing. So how is it happening and why is it happening? So what proceedings are being transcribed? So the artificial intelligence transcript is seen on the live streaming screen of the courtroom number 1, where is Chief Justice of India's court. So the 5-judge bench headed by the CJI is hearing the case related to the political crisis in Maharashtra. So this case is being live streamed, and we are seeing that it is being transcribed. So like what is the artificial intelligence powering this transcription? So the Supreme Court transcription is using Terrace, which is a platform used often for transcribing the arbitration proceedings. So the platform is run by the Nomology Technology Private Limited, which is a Bengaluru based company. So the transcript will be shared for the verification with the lawyers who argued the cases and is likely to be uploaded on the Supreme Court website every evening. So, what is the significance of this step? So, transcribing is the second major decision towards making the court more transparent after the Supreme Court's decision to live stream its proceedings before the Constitution benches. So, two major steps when it comes to increasing the transparency between the people and the judiciary. So, the suggestion to transcribe the hearings was made by the senior advocate. Indira Jaising in the plea she had filed seeking live telecast of the court proceedings. So does this happen in other countries also? So in US, the court transcripts they are available to litigants and the public, and the US Supreme Court provides audio and the text transcripts of the proceedings also. And many local courts in the US they also make a stenographic record of most of the court proceedings. And in the UK, a litigant can ask for a transcript of the court proceedings for a fee if the hearing is recorded. So it is there in UK and more liberally in US. So we have talked about La Nina and El Nino in detail. So our reliance on the crude oil imports rises to 87% between April to Jan. And here we also have the figures. So domestic crude oil output remains almost at the same level, or we can say it has declined marginally. Then crude oil imports, they have increased from 175.8 million tons to 192 million tons. Domestic consumption of the petroleum products has also increased production of the petroleum products for the domestic crude that has marginally declined, and self-sufficiency in the crude oil to meet the domestic demand has also decreased. Dependency on the imported crude to meet the domestic demand has obviously increased. So we are seeing more dependence upon imports and reducing domestic efficiency or domestic production when it comes to crude oil. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in Sarkari. I hope you have understood all the key things in the topics that we discussed today, and you'll be getting the PDF link in the description box. And also do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button and share this video as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us.